Margaret, you don't have to explain everything, my daughter-in-law said, smiling as if she were offering me kindness instead of correction, and the table laughed softly like I had just committed some small social mistake. It was my 70th birthday dinner, the kind with linen napkins and a 3-layer lemon cake I had baked myself that morning, the kind where the candles flicker against polished silver and everyone pretends we are closer than we are. I remember holding my water glass, feeling the condensation against my fingers, and realizing I had just spent 3 full minutes explaining why I chose that particular restaurant, why I invited the neighbors, why I thought 6 o'clock would be easier for everyone's schedule. I wasn't telling a story. I was defending it. That was the moment something shifted. I smiled back at Chloe, nodded gently, and said nothing more. But inside, I saw it clearly for the first time. For years, I had been shrinking in small, polite increments. I added the word just to my sentences. I'm just checking in. I just thought maybe. I'm sorry, I just assumed. I apologized for things that required no apology. I explained decisions that were mine to make. Even in my own home, a house Daniel grew up in, a house my late husband and I paid off over 30 years of careful budgeting and skipped vacations, I felt the need to provide footnotes to my existence. The laughter around the table faded into background noise as memories lined up neatly in my mind. The Christmas, I sent a long email explaining why I couldn't drive the 2 hours in a snowstorm. The afternoon, I detailed every ingredient in a casserole because Chloe once mentioned watching her sodium intake. The time, I justified repainting the guest room, as if changing the color of my own walls required a committee vote. No one had ordered me to do this. No one had shouted. It was subtler than that. A raised eyebrow, a gentle correction, a comment about how things were done differently now. And each time, I adjusted. I clarified. I softened myself so no one would feel uncomfortable. Sitting there beneath a banner that read Happy 70th, I realized I had been negotiating for oxygen in a room that already belonged to me. Chloe reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We just worry about you, Margaret, she said lightly, and I almost explained again, almost assured her I was perfectly capable, almost listed the mile I still walk every morning and the way I manage my own finances down to the penny. Instead, I took a slow breath. The cake was sweet. The candles were still burning. And for the first time in a long time, I decided I would not add another word. That night, after the dishes were washed and the last of the wrapping paper had been folded into the trash, I stood alone in my kitchen and listened to the refrigerator hum. The house felt larger than it had that morning, as if the walls had quietly expanded once the laughter left. I replayed the dinner in my mind, not with anger, but with precision. I heard my own voice again, the way it stretched and curved around every sentence, cushioning it, softening it, preparing it for approval. I remembered how I had explained why I chose lemon cake instead of chocolate, how I described the sale at the grocery store as if thrift required justification, how I clarified that I invited the Millers because they had been kind to me after my husband passed. No one had demanded those explanations. I offered them freely, like little peace offerings placed at the center of the table. I walked down the hallway toward the living room, passing framed photographs that traced the last 40 years of my life. There was Daniel at age 8 holding a Little League trophy, his grin missing 2 front teeth. There was my husband in his navy blue blazer at our 25th anniversary dinner, his arms steady around my waist. I never explained myself to him. I never needed to. He listened. He nodded. He trusted my judgment. Somewhere between widowhood and welcoming a new generation into this family, I had started narrating my own existence as if I were a guest in it. I sat in my armchair and picked up my phone. There was a message from Chloe thanking me for dinner and suggesting that next time we could keep things simpler. The word simpler glowed on the screen. I almost typed back a long reply, explaining that I enjoy hosting, that cooking for people makes me feel useful, that I have plenty of time and energy for it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I placed the phone face down on the side table. Silence filled the room, but it was not heavy. It was clean. I began to notice the pattern more clearly. The way I preemptively defended my choices before anyone questioned them. The way I apologized for traffic delays that were not my fault. The way I checked Daniel's expression mid-sentence to see if I needed to adjust my tone. I had been monitoring myself like a student waiting for correction. The realization was not dramatic. It was steady. I did not feel rage. I felt clarity. I stood, turned off the kitchen light, and locked the front door. Tomorrow, I would wake up at 6:30 as usual, walk my mile around the neighborhood, and make my coffee strong and black. And when I spoke, I would say only what was necessary. No footnotes. No disclaimers. Just the truth, clean and whole. The next morning, I kept my promise to myself. I woke at 6:30, laced up my walking shoes, and stepped into the cool air of our suburban street just as the sun began to rise over the maple trees. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sound of a garbage truck and the steady rhythm of my own footsteps against the pavement. For years, I had used these morning walks to rehearse conversations in my head, preparing explanations before the day even began. If Daniel called, I would clarify why I had not answered immediately. If Chloe texted, I would carefully compose a thoughtful response, making sure every word sounded reasonable, pleasant, unthreatening. But that morning, I did not rehearse anything. I counted my steps instead. 1 block, 2 blocks, half a mile. The sky shifted from pale gray to soft gold, and with each turn around the familiar corners, I felt the space inside my chest widen. When I returned home, I brewed my coffee and sat at the kitchen table without turning on the television. The silence no longer felt like something to fill. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. I watched it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering. His voice sounded distracted, as it often did on weekday mornings. He asked if I could pick up Emma from soccer practice later because Chloe had a work dinner and he might be late. In the past, I would have said yes immediately and then explained that I had planned to attend my book club meeting but could rearrange it, adding reassurance that it was no trouble at all. This time I paused. I glanced at the calendar hanging near the refrigerator where book club was circled in blue ink. I said, I have book club at 6. I can pick her up if practice ends before 5:30. There was a small silence on the line, not dramatic, just unfamiliar. Daniel said he would check the schedule and call me back. I did not rush to fill the gap with apologies. I did not offer alternative plans. I simply said, let me know. After we hung up, I noticed my hands were steady. The world had not tilted. No one had accused me of being selfish. The ceiling did not crack open because I had stated a boundary. An hour later, Chloe sent a message asking why I could not skip book club just this once. I read it carefully. I typed a response, then erased it. I started again, then erased it again. Finally, I wrote, I look forward to book club each month. I am available before 5:30. I pressed send. No explanation about how long I had been a member. No defense of my schedule. Just a fact. I set the phone down and took a sip of coffee. It tasted the same as always, strong and slightly bitter, but I felt something new settle into place. I was no longer negotiating for space in my own life. I was simply occupying it. Daniel called back just after noon. He said practice ended at 5 and asked if I could pick him up then. I told him yes, I will be there at 5. I did not add that I would leave early to allow for traffic. I did not mention that the field was 20 minutes away if the lights were kind and closer to 30 if they were not. I simply marked the time in my mind and returned to my day. That afternoon, I drove to the soccer field with the windows cracked open, warm spring air moving gently through the car. Parents stood along the sidelines in folding chairs, some scrolling through their phones, others shouting encouragement. I spotted Emma near the goal, her ponytail swinging as she ran. When practice ended, she climbed into the passenger seat and tossed her backpack at her feet. She looked at me carefully, the way perceptive teenagers do when they sense something unspoken. On the drive home, she asked if I had fun at my birthday dinner. I told her I did. Then she hesitated and said, Mom says you get stressed when you host too much. In the past, I would have rushed to clarify that I was not stressed, that I enjoy cooking, that I have plenty of energy, that I do not mind cleaning up afterward. Instead, I kept my eyes on the road and said, I host because I enjoy it. If I do not enjoy it, I will not do it. She nodded slowly, absorbing that. After a moment she said, that makes sense. The simplicity of it startled me. No debate. No correction. Just acceptance. When we pulled into my driveway, she gathered her things and paused before getting out of the car. Grandma, she said, you know you do not have to explain everything, right? The words were similar to Chloe's, but they felt different. There was no edge, no quiet dismissal. Just concern. I smiled and told her I am learning that. Inside the house, I set my keys on the counter and noticed how calm the rooms felt. Later that evening, Chloe called. Her tone was polite but tight. She said Emma mentioned our conversation in the car, and asked what exactly I meant by saying I would not do things I do not enjoy. I heard the invitation to elaborate, to soften, to reassure her that nothing was changing. I chose my words carefully. I said, "It means I am paying attention to my limits." There was a pause on the other end. She said she hoped I was not feeling unappreciated. I almost responded with a long explanation about gratitude and family and how much I value our time together. Instead, I said, "I am feeling clearer." The line went quiet for a second, and then she changed the subject. After we hung up, I stood at the kitchen sink watching the last light fade from the sky. The world remained intact. The house did not tremble. No one withdrew their love. I realized that much of my fear had been imaginary, built on the assumption that if I did not cushion every sentence, something fragile would shatter. But nothing had shattered. Something had steadied. The shift did not announce itself with fireworks or confrontation. It unfolded in small, ordinary moments, like the following Sunday when Daniel and Chloe came over for dinner again. I chose roasted chicken, green beans with almonds, and a simple salad. No layered explanations about recipes or grocery prices. When they arrived, Chloe glanced at the table and said it looked lovely. I thanked her. Just that. During dinner, Daniel mentioned they were thinking about repainting their living room and asked what color I preferred. In the past, I would have prefaced my opinion with disclaimers, saying that my taste might be outdated or that they should follow current trends. This time I said, "I like warm neutrals. They feel inviting." Then I took another bite of chicken. The conversation moved on. I noticed Chloe watching me, as if waiting for more. When none came, she filled the space herself, explaining why she leaned toward cool gray tones and listing several design blogs she followed. I listened without correcting or persuading. After dessert, Chloe began describing a new after-school schedule for Emma and mentioned that it might be easier if I kept one evening each week open in case they needed help. The old reflex rose in me, ready to assure her that my calendar was flexible, that I had nothing more important than supporting them. Instead, I folded my napkin and said, "I need to see how that fits with my plans." There was a brief stillness at the table. Daniel cleared his throat. Chloe smiled, but it did not quite reach her eyes. She said, "Of course, just let us know." The word just hovered between us, familiar and faintly ironic. I felt my heartbeat in my chest, steady but present. After they left, I washed the dishes slowly, aware of how different the evening had felt. I had not been sharper. I had not been colder. I had simply been concise. The house felt balanced, as if the furniture had been subtly rearranged into a more stable position. The next day, Chloe sent a long message outlining the weekly schedule in detail and suggesting which evenings would work best for me to remain available. I read it carefully. I imagined the version of myself from a month ago drafting a careful reply, explaining every existing commitment, apologizing for any inconvenience. Instead, I responded with 3 sentences. I am available on Tuesdays until 7. I am not available on Thursdays. I will confirm Fridays case by case. I placed the phone down and waited. When her reply came, it was shorter than usual. She thanked me and adjusted her plans accordingly. I sat back in my chair and felt something settle firmly into place. The world had adjusted around my clarity, not because I had argued for it, but because I had stopped cushioning every edge. For the first time in years, I was not shrinking to make the room comfortable. I was simply standing at my full height, and the ceiling was high enough. By the 3rd week, the change was no longer an experiment. It was becoming a habit. I noticed it in the smallest exchanges. When Chloe called to suggest moving our usual Sunday dinner to Saturday, because she had brunch plans with friends, she waited, almost cautiously, after explaining her schedule in detail. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I said, "Saturday works for me this time. Next week, I prefer Sunday." My voice sounded even to my own ears, neither defensive nor sharp. She agreed quickly, as if relieved that the negotiation had not stretched into something longer. Later that afternoon, Daniel stopped by alone to return a serving dish. He stood in the kitchen, shifting his weight slightly, and said he had noticed I seemed different lately. I asked him what he meant. He said I seemed quieter, more direct. In the past, that comment might have sent me into reassurance, explaining that I was not upset, that I was simply tired, that nothing was wrong. Instead, I said, "I am being more intentional with my words." He studied my face for a moment, then nodded slowly. He admitted that sometimes he had relied on me to make things easier, to adjust my plans so his would not have to change. There was no accusation in his tone, only recognition. I did not lecture him. I did not recount the years of accommodation. I simply said, I am still here for you. I just will not stretch beyond my limits without thinking. The air between us felt clearer than it had in a long time. That evening, as I sat on the back porch, watching the sun lower itself behind the fence line, I thought about how much energy I had once spent trying to prevent discomfort. I believed harmony depended on my flexibility. I believed love required constant explanation. But love that depends on shrinking is not harmony. It is performance. I could see now how often I had mistaken over-explaining for kindness. I thought I was being considerate. In reality, I was asking permission to matter. The following morning, Chloe sent a brief message confirming dinner for Saturday and thanking me for being flexible. There was no suggestion that I keep the entire weekend open, no subtle pressure. Just a clear plan. I responded, "You are welcome. See you at 6. I did not add an exclamation point. I did not attach a smile. The simplicity felt steady, not cold. As the days passed, I realized something else had changed. I was sleeping better. My shoulders felt lighter. Conversations no longer replayed in my mind at midnight because there were fewer loose threads to analyze. When I spoke plainly, there was nothing to defend later. I began to understand that clarity is not harsh. It is efficient, and in that efficiency, there is a quiet kind of dignity that does not ask for applause. It simply stands, firm and unembellished, in its own space. It was Chloe who finally said it out loud. We were standing in my kitchen on Saturday evening, the roasted vegetables still warm in their dish, Daniel setting the table in the dining room, while Emma scrolled through her phone near the window. Chloe leaned against the counter and watched me pour iced tea into 4 glasses. You have been different lately, she said, not unkindly, but not casually either. I placed the pitcher down carefully and met her eyes. Different how? I asked. She hesitated, searching for the right word. More distant, she said. Less accommodating. The word hung between us, precise and revealing. A month ago, I would have rushed to reassure her that I was not upset, that I valued being helpful, that I never wanted to seem difficult. I would have explained my intentions until the air felt crowded with justification. Instead, I picked up a linen napkin and folded it once slowly. I said, I am being clearer. She crossed her arms lightly, not defensive, just guarded. Clear about what? I considered. The question. Clear about what I can do and what I cannot. Clear about what I enjoy and what I do not. My voice did not rise. It did not soften either. It simply remained steady. She studied me as if recalculating something she thought she understood. Daniel stepped back into the kitchen just then, unaware of the shift in tone. Everything okay? He asked. Chloe nodded, but her gaze did not leave my face. We are just talking, she said. During dinner, the conversation moved through familiar territory. Emma described a science project. Daniel talked about a client presentation. Chloe mentioned an upcoming work conference. At one point, she asked if I would be able to stay overnight with Emma during the trip. The old instinct flickered again, the urge to say yes immediately and adjust everything else later. Instead, I asked what dates. She told me. I took a sip of water and said, I can stay 2 of those nights. I have plans the 3rd evening. She looked surprised. What plans? She asked. I held her gaze and answered, dinner with friends. I did not specify which friends. I did not justify the importance. The table grew quiet for a brief second. Then Daniel said that 2 nights would still be very helpful. Chloe nodded slowly and said, thank you. There was something different in her tone, less assumption, more request. After they left that evening, I stood at the front door watching their car disappear down the street. My heart was calm. I realized the tension I had feared was not explosive or dramatic. It was simply the sound of old expectations adjusting to new boundaries. I had not raised my voice. I had not accused anyone of taking advantage. I had only stopped volunteering explanations that made my needs negotiable. In the quiet of the house, I understood that clarity does not push people away. It shows them where you stand. And if they wish to stand beside you, they will. The week of Chloe's conference arrived with a quiet sense of testing, as if the air itself were waiting to see whether I would slip back into old habits. I stayed with Emma on Monday and Tuesday night, just as I had said I would. We ate simple dinners at my house, spaghetti one evening and grilled cheese with tomato soup the next. After, She finished her homework. We sat at the kitchen table and worked on her science project, measuring baking soda in careful teaspoons and recording observations in neat columns. At 9:30, I told her it was time to wind down. No apology for the structure. No explanation about how important sleep is for teenagers. Just a calm, steady routine. On Wednesday afternoon, Chloe called from the airport during a layover. Her voice sounded rushed, threaded with the noise of announcements in the background. She asked if I could possibly keep Emma one more night, because her return flight might be delayed. I felt the familiar pull in my chest, the instinct to solve the problem before it fully formed. I pictured my dinner reservation with friends, the one I had mentioned clearly the week before. For a split second, I imagined canceling it and sending a polite text filled with justification. Instead, I said, I have plans tonight. Daniel can pick Emma up after practice. There was a pause, longer this time. Chloe exhaled and said she would call Daniel. She did not argue. She did not question the importance of my plans. She simply accepted the boundary. After we hung up, I noticed my pulse was steady. I did not feel guilty. I felt aligned. That evening, I changed into a navy sweater and drove 15 minutes to the restaurant where my book club friends had decided to meet for dinner instead of our usual discussion. We talked about novels and grandchildren and the rising cost of groceries. At one point, I found myself laughing freely, not monitoring my tone, not trimming my sentences. I spoke without padding my words. When I returned home later that night, the house was dark and quiet. There was a message from Daniel thanking me for helping earlier in the week and saying he had picked Emma up without any trouble. I read it once and placed the phone on the nightstand. I realized that nothing catastrophic had happened because I held to my commitment. Emma was safe. Daniel had adjusted. Chloe had managed. The world had continued turning. Lying in bed, I understood something with a clarity that felt almost physical. For years, I believed my over-explaining kept everything stable. I believed my constant availability prevented inconvenience. But stability does not come from one person bending endlessly. It comes from everyone, standing on their own feet. In the quiet of that room, I felt no urge to draft explanations in my mind. I had said what was necessary. I had meant it. And that was enough. The following Sunday, they came for dinner again, but something in the room had shifted in a way that felt almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Chloe brought a bottle of wine and asked, "Would you like me to open this? Or do you have something else planned?" The question was small, ordinary, but it carried a different tone. It was not an assumption. It was an invitation. I told her the wine was perfect and handed her the opener. Daniel set the plates on the table without asking whether I needed help rearranging the chairs. Emma showed me a graded paper with a bright red 93 at the top, and I told her I was proud of her. I did not follow it with a lecture about maintaining that average. I did not explain the value of discipline. I simply let the praise stand. During dinner, Chloe described her conference in detail, the presentations she attended, the colleagues she met. At one point, she paused and said, "Thank you again for helping with Emma. I know you had your own plans." I looked at her and said, "I was glad to help the nights I could." The words were calm, measured. They did not stretch beyond their truth. Daniel reached for more green beans and said he appreciated that I had been clear about my schedule. It made things easier to plan, he admitted. I noticed the absence of tension in his voice. No one was walking on eggshells. No one was bracing for correction. The conversation flowed without the usual undercurrent of subtle negotiation. After dessert, Chloe stayed behind in the kitchen while Daniel and Emma carried dishes to the sink. She dried her hands on a towel and said quietly, "I hope you know I never meant to make you feel small." I considered her words carefully. I did not rush to absolve her. I did not catalog past moments. I said I know that, and I also know I allowed it. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, not in offense, but in realization. We stood there in a silence that felt honest rather than strained. For the first time, I did not feel like I needed to convince her of my intentions or defend my worth. I had stopped over-explaining not to punish anyone, but to return to myself. Later that night, after they left, I turned off the kitchen light and walked through the quiet house. The floors creaked softly beneath my steps, familiar and steady. I paused in the hallway where the family photographs lined the wall. The woman in those frames had always been capable. She had always been strong. She had simply forgotten that clarity requires fewer words, not more. I no longer felt the urge to rehearse tomorrow's conversations. I did not need to prepare a defense for existing. I had simplified, not my love, not my presence, but my language. And in that simplicity, I found something I had not realized I was missing all these years. Space. Clean, unoccupied space where my voice could stand on its own without apology.